For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Barry Murphy and I am the Commercial Director with Flogas Enterprise. So our webinar this morning will cover the benefits of corporate power purchase agreements and indeed corporate biomethane purchase agreements, because sustainability is not just about electricity, it's also about renewable gas as well. So our speaker today is James Temple, who is our Renewables Manager with Flogas Enterprise. So before we start, just some housekeeping. You will be on mute. You will be able to put in questions in the chat function as the presentation is going on, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. The presentation from James will take approximately 25 minutes, and then we'll open up all mics for a Q&A session, 5 to 10 minutes at the end. The webinar will be recorded and will be available to you at the end as well. So now I'm going to hand over to James Temple, who will go through the body of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, look, thanks everybody for joining. I'm James Temple. I'm the Renewables Manager here in Flogas Enterprise, and I'm here today to talk about corporate power purchase agreements. So a corporate power purchase agreement, which I'll probably refer to as a corporate power purchase agreement, a corporate PPA or a CPPA, they all mean the same thing. It's an exciting new way to procure energy. It's something that excites me. It's interesting. It's new in the Irish market, but it's well established in the US market and in EU as well. So the European market. So it's something we've seen happen in other jurisdictions, and we're excited to bring here. So we said we'd do a webinar on it, and I manage the renewables department in Flogas Enterprise. We've been procuring renewable electricity through PPAs for over 10 years now, directly from wind farms. That's kind of formed part of our portfolio. But in terms of sustainability targets and targeting net zero and becoming as green as you possibly can, I want to explain this concept of procuring power directly from a renewable producing facility. You know, so if you could just go on to the next slide there, please, Siobhan. Thank you. So yeah, I wanted this webinar to be, you know, rather than just a sales pitch or just something that maybe you log on to and don't take anything away from. I wanted to be just a little bit more educational, and I decided to structure it in terms of 5, let's call it, learning objectives. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, everyone will be able to walk away saying that they know these 5 things, right? And the first one being a bit of an update. Sorry, I know my camera is shaking there as well, so apologies about that. A bit of an update on the renewables industry in Ireland, kind of where it's come from, where it's going, and what the state of play is in 2022. And by that I mean around development of renewable wind farms, solar farms, that type of thing. So that'll be the first learning. The second is to give an overview on the fundamentals of corporate PPAs, just high level stuff, what it is, how it works in a nutshell. And yeah, it can be a bit detailed, so I'm not going to go into detail today, but just to give you an overview, kind of what they are, how they work, and how you might start thinking about it, you know. The third learning objective is to specifically understand kind of how they relate to net zero and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions reporting and that type of thing. The fourth, then, I want to, as I said there, empower you to explore this concept of corporate PPA procurement. So I want you to come away from the webinar kind of, you know, the industry, you know, kind of what it is, you know, maybe how it'll address sustainability goals, and now what's the first step? You know, what do I think about, or who do I need to ask about this? You know, internally and externally. And then the fifth learning objective is a sneaky little bit of a sales pitch, which is just kind of at the end. It's one slide which just kind of explains kind of what we do around this stuff and the value we can bring into the corporate PPA process and why we want to see it happen. You know, so that's the last one. I won't dwell on that too much, but in a nutshell, we have five learning objectives. And thanks, Siobhan, for moving things along there. The first one is obviously the update on the renewables industry today. So so we're in 2022 today. Renewable generation of electricity in Ireland realistically kind of took off about 20 years ago, maybe a little earlier than that. It's some pilot projects, but when Siobhan, if you want to make your screen just full there as well, that'd be useful. Just make things a little bigger, but if not, don't worry about it. In a nutshell, renewable electricity in Ireland today means wind electricity production. 85% of the renewable electricity in Ireland is wind. I've listed there at the top a couple of other technology types, which are landfill gas, biomass, a bit of hydro. As I said, 85% of renewable electricity is wind today. Then there's solar, there's anaerobic digestion, there's battery energy storage. So there's a lot of different solutions, but in Ireland, when you're talking, wind is synonymous with renewable electricity today. Now, there's a huge pipeline of solar, and solar has not had difficulty deploying in Ireland to date, but those costs have thankfully come down enough now that and you'll see it on my next slide, that there's a lot of solar development in the pipeline, you know. So that's kind of what the renewables portfolio of Ireland Inc. looks like. And what's been the drivers of development of those projects to date? It's been government subsidies, realistically, to date. The market was quite immature 20 years ago, so the government put in place subsidy support schemes to offer guaranteed pricing to renewable projects, and they were known at the time as AER, which finished in 2006, and REFIT, which closed for applications in I think it was 2015 was the last REFIT scheme, and then maybe some of those projects came online by their deadline of 2018 or maybe late 2017. I can't remember exactly. But they've been the drivers of development to date. So in those schemes, if you were building a wind farm, you would get your consents in place, get your site, get everything up and running, and the government would give you a fixed price for 15-year term. So you would apply. You get, if you're wind, you get a wind price. If you're landfill gas, you get a landfill gas site or price, and that was it. It was fairly straightforward. If you're eligible, you get your price. The way things are today now, there's still a government subsidy available. As I said, REFIT closed in 2015, and there was a bit of a gap there then for 5 years until RES. Now, RES stands for Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. There's a plan to hold for 5 versions of RES to happen, and 2 of those have occurred already. Now, RES is auction based. It's different from the previous ones. So what you have now is wind farm A, wind farm B, solar farm A, solar farm B, all competing against each other to offer the best price to win a government subsidy contract. And that's what's been driving the investor and developer confidence to scope out projects in Ireland and build up that pipeline, which is quite large. So they've gone in, they've got their planning permissions, they've applied and have been granted grid connection offers, and they're engaging with banks around how to finance the project, and turbine or panel suppliers about how to get them over here. So all on the back of hopefully being successful in that auction. Now, obviously, it's a competitive process, and there's not a guarantee that everyone's going to be successful, whether it's due to not being competitive on the price, or whether it's not reaching various milestones along the way and having to forfeit your price, you know, before you get up and running. So in terms of drivers to date, that's been it. It's been government subsidies, and then there's been a handful of corporate PPAs announced publicly in Ireland. All have been large software companies or one pharmaceutical company as well. So there's been a handful of them. As I said, there's less than 5, and but it's much more common or much more mature market in the US and EU around this stuff. So we're trying to promote it here, and hopefully people see the value and learn a bit about them here today. So in terms of the renewables development pipeline in 2022, just last week, the second of the RES auctions just closed, and we've learned that 2 gigawatts of renewables development have been successful in that auction. You know, so however, there's also 1 gigawatt, a further gigawatt of projects that were not successful in that auction, and in addition to that, again, there's more projects which didn't apply for that auction, and maybe they're working towards the auction next year or whatever their plan is. But there's a big pipeline. All of these projects are fully consented, and then there's an even further pipeline that are working through getting more consent. So what I'm trying to say is there's RES auctions that are there supporting renewable projects, but there's a large pipeline that is waiting for deployment. And Siobhan, just if you could go back one slide, please, to the previous one there. Yeah. And just in terms of the policy environment then around kind of corporate PPAs in Ireland, and specifically corporate PPAs in Ireland, in June 2019 in the Climate Action Plan, the government set a target of 15% of demand in 2030 to come from corporate PPAs. In March 2021, the SEAI ran a consultation, a public consultation on what policy options would be suitable to promote corporate PPAs. We did respond to that, and we engaged our customers around that as well. And it kind of spanned a lot of things around how do we make things easier for corporate buyers to get involved? How do we make things easier for developers? How do we make planning permissions easier? So it was quite a well-rounded consultation. But unfortunately, we haven't seen any follow-up on that yet. There was follow-up due Q4 last year. There was follow-up due Q1 this year, and it still hasn't materialized. And we're halfway through, or more than half the way through Q2 this year as well. So hopefully we see some outcome on that, and we see some favourable policy progression in that area. And then just recently, the department published a sort of a roadmap around renewable electricity corporate PPAs, which is great, but it was light on details. So it was almost a plan to make a plan, and so it didn't really give much in terms of it didn't have much meat on the bone. So that's a bit of an overview of as to the Irish renewable industry today in terms of renewable development and where it came from, I suppose, and what it looks like, and then the bit of policy as well. And then that next slide with the yellow and green chart on it, that was the outcome of the RES auction last week. If you want to move forward one slide, please, Siobhan. The green were the successful win. Green on the left, bar were or column, just the previous one there, Siobhan, please. The green on the left bar was the successful wind projects, and the yellow was the successful solar, which you can see there now. And then on the right was the unsuccessful projects. So a lot of unsuccessful solar, nearly a gigawatt, and then a small bit of successful wind. So I was surprised to see not so many wind volumes seem to have gone into the auction relative to solar, but it wasn't surprising in the solar respect, because we know there's a big pipeline there ready to come into, but there is a further big wind pipeline there, which maybe this auction was a little bit early for them, and they wanted to see how things go, or they're trying to nail down pricing after the past year and how things have gone. So maybe they'll target the auction next year. So that's the RES 2 results, which were just published last week. Next slide there, Siobhan, please. And this is just a quick snapshot of corporate PPAs announced globally. We have the Americas in a sort of a light blue, Europe, Middle East, Africa in a darker blue, and then Asia Pacific in green. And you can see what I mean when I say that these markets are a bit more advanced or mature, in that 15 gigawatts announced in Americas, and what's that? I suppose it's 7 gigawatt announced in Europe and Middle East and Africa, and then a further 2 or 3 gigawatts in Asia Pacific. Ireland, I said there was less than 5 deals that amounts to. They're big projects in fairness, so it amounts to about 0.3 gigawatts, but on a global scale, it's still quite small. And I think that the 0.3 gigawatts is equivalent maybe to similar markets that are similar size to us. But yeah, there's a lot more to be done, but this is a well established practice or way of procuring energy in the corporate PPA. So next slide there, Siobhan, please. So look, that's your first learning objective of kind of the state of the Irish market, and a bit of a snapshot as to what's going on globally. And the second one is to understand the fundamentals of a corporate PPA. And if you can move on just one slide, please, Siobhan. So I broke that into 4 questions, and I'll keep it simple. But with everything, there's always a bit more detail, kind of as you learn more, So I will keep it simple as to kind of what a corporate PPA is. How is it different to standard supply? Why is it a good idea? And I do think it's a good idea. It's really exciting. And who should consider a corporate PPA? Because they might not be for everyone. So what is a corporate PPA? Simply put, it's a contract for purchase and sale of electricity between a producer and a consumer. Now, if you consider the way a standard electricity contract today, it might just be the right piece of this diagram on the slide there, which shows the corporate buying power from the utility, which I've put in as Flogas, and the power being sold to the utility as well. So the right hand side of that is maybe what it looks like today. And a corporate PPA, what it does is brings in the renewable production facility to that supply agreement, and they're party to that. And you now have an agreement between an electricity producer and electricity consumer as to maybe the price, the term, the volumes of kind of how much energy you're going to be consume and produce. And with in Ireland, only a licensed supplier can buy and sell electricity through the grid, and that's actually an important point, is that that renewable facility can be anywhere on the grid. It doesn't have to be next to your site or anything. It just needs to put power onto the grid, and the supplier purchases that power and then supplies it to your site. And so in a nutshell, that's it. It's an electricity supply agreement with a renewable producer bundled into it, and then you agree your kind of terms onto that. And the next slide there, please, Siobhan. How is it different to normal electricity supply? I've kind of put up the first point, is that it's non-standard procurement. So you can't call up Barry today and say, I'd love a corporate PPA, 1st of July start, let's go, you know. It's moving away from standard electricity supply, because now instead of just procuring electricity from, say, from Flogas, from our book, from our portfolio, you're now kind of approaching a developer directly, and you're agreeing all the terms. You're putting forward a price. They might put back on the price. You might do a bit of negotiation around that. Yeah, you need a term, generally a long term, and I'll explain why in a minute. There's all the pieces then around, well, when is this project going to be built? What happens if it's delayed when it's built? And when it's up and running, how do we manage the green certificates that arise out of that? So there's an operational piece to it, and it's kind of moving away from that non-standard procurement. And a big important piece of it is the last two bullet points I've put there, is that it's going to be a long-term commitment required, and generally these are going to be fixed price arrangements. And the reason for those two bullet points, it's driven by lenders. So if you want to build a wind farm and you need a 10 million euro loan to go and build this wind farm, then you're going to need to get that money from, say, a bank. The bank needs to know they're going to get their repayments back. And well, how do they know that? Well, if a wind farm is going to produce power, and they can say, well, look, we have a Flogas customer who's committed, they're going to buy power directly from us for 10 years, and they're going to give us this price. Then the bank says, well, that's great. Okay, here's your loan. And in the past, that buyer would have been government subsidy schemes. Well, look, we have a government contract. That means we can produce power, and we're going to get paid for 15 years. Brilliant. So in this case, when it comes to corporate PPAs, usually the minimum acceptable term is going to be 10 years, and you'll see I mentioned that the government subsidies typically last the 15 years. So 10 years tends to be the middle ground that's required for a renewable project to get it up and running. And that fixed price piece is important, because they need a bit of certainty about their revenues, and so that the bank is comfortable that they will be repaid. And the point I skipped over was the second point there, which is the important piece, which is your physical supply is not interrupted at any point. So this renewable facility, whether it's wind or solar or biomass or whatever it might be, could be anywhere on the grid. And the corporate PPA is a contractual instrument that sits on top of the supply. So the power is procured from one area in the grid, and it's just sold to you in your meter with that kind of contractual instrument, with the renewable producers sitting on top of it. So that's how it's different. I know there's probably questions and all that, but I think we said we leave questions till the end. So I'll keep going. Why do I think it's a good idea? I've summarized it into three pillars or groups or areas or whatever you want to call them. From a commercial element, there's value versus the market. The Res2 auction gave some great insight as to the pricing in 2022 to procure solar and wind power. The price in the average bid price in Res2, because every project gets their own price, but the average overall pot price was €98 a megawatt hour. So that gives you an indication, because I know the market has oftentimes been maybe more than twice that, you know. So there is value, especially against today's market, and so that value is what kind of drives the buyers to consider this as the commercial piece in corporate PPAs. So the value being there from a commercial perspective. The second piece, kind of commercially, is that this is an energy hedge. It's a long-term energy hedge, so you get that bit of budget certainty. You now know your energy costs for 10 years or 15 years, whatever you decide to contract for. Some people will value that themselves, depending on their organization and their procurement strategies, and maybe some people won't. But for people who do, then a corporate PPA is a brilliant instrument to achieve that, you know. From a green perspective, the power is the claim on green power is traceable. You can identify exactly the wind farm, even down to the wind turbine that the power came out from at certain times of the day or whatever. So you know exactly where your power is coming from. The concept of additionality is important, because what this means, and it's a concept driven largely by the software companies to date, and it means that you're responsible for bringing new additional green power or energy onto the grid that wouldn't have otherwise existed without your support. So because you've committed to this project for 10 years or 15 years and you've guaranteed it a price, this project has gone and it's been developed. And if you hadn't done that, there'd be no project. So that concept is called additionality, and it's important. And you can think, well, look, why don't I just do a corporate PPA with a wind farm that's been operating for 10 years or 15 years, and maybe we can just, they don't need a 10-year commitment. Why don't we just do 3 years with that? That's absolutely an option, and it depends on what you value. If you put a value on additionality, because that contracting with an existing wind farm doesn't address the amount of work that needs to be done to reach, call it at a country level or at a global level, or even at a business level. It doesn't address what needs to be done to reach net zero by 2050 and be in line with the Paris agreement and avoid kind of dangerous climate change, because there's so much that's done already, but there's so much more to do. So that additionality piece just kind of puts the emphasis on, well, there needs to be a new development to help keep in line with these initiatives and the ambition to avoid climate change. And the Scope 2 emissions piece, bundled into any of these corporate PPAs is your green certificates, which state your claim on the green power, and very much for the accounting piece, which says we have this many Scope 2 emissions and we have this many Scope 2 green certificates arising from our corporate PPA, at least in respect to the electricity produced. So our electricity emissions are the market-based emissions can be deemed to be, or are accounted to be zero, because we've used our certificates from our corporate PPA. And then from a business perspective, there's some wider benefits, like the resilience of your business. As I say, the energy certainty or the budget certainty for 10 years, you're now locked into that. So you don't, that adds resilience to your business in the face of economic downturn or anything else, or an energy crisis like we've seen in the past few months, So your business is now that much more resilient. There's the PR and marketing that comes off it. Of course, you could anything's on the table here. As I say, you can negotiate with the developer what your terms. You might say, well, one of my key terms is I want to name the wind farm. So you could say, well, look, it's now the customer A wind farm down in whatever county it might be. And then the last piece is the community benefits. So good practice of a corporate PPA is to include the local community around the turbine, and to administer a sort of a benefit fund where some of the monies from the wind farm will go into the local community, like GAR clubs and that. And that's good practice, and there's a sort of a process around that, and it's kind of well established. It's built into the likes of the RES scheme, that type of thing. And that's to build in the social acceptance, but also to bring along the community and get everyone on board, Next slide there, please, Siobhan. I'm aware I'm kind of off time there, so I'll try to speed it up a little bit. In a nutshell, who should consider a corporate PPA? If you're reporting in Scope 2 emissions, if you want to decarbonise and you've net zero targets, or you're seeking energy budget certainty, then you should be thinking about a corporate PPA. Next slide, please. So how can a corporate PPA help you achieve net zero and reduce your emissions? Well, kind of as I alluded to, the green certificates that arise from a corporate PPA can be used in your carbon accounting. So in the next slide there, Siobhan, please, you'll see the greenhouse gas protocol kind of gives a bit of guidance around Scope 2 emissions, how to account for them, how to report for them, a lot of stuff, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with that. And if you go on to the next page, please, Siobhan, you'll see that the corporate PPA piece is referenced, and it says that, look, once your certificates are bundled into the deal, this is suitable for your carbon accounting. And then I mentioned on the right hand side, I won't read through it now, but I'll leave it. We'll circulate the slides afterwards so you can read through. But I just mentioned the concept again of additionality and how that kind of ties into this. So that's your third learning objective, which is to see how a corporate PPA can address your Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions and help on the journey towards net zero. The fourth learning objective, as I've called them, is to empower you to explore the concept of corporate PPA procurement. So taking a step back so far, we know the industry in Ireland. We now understand, hopefully, the fundamentals, or we have an idea at least of the fundamentals of a corporate PPA. We now understand how we can use a corporate PPA and how it will work towards our Scope 2 emissions and our greenhouse gas emissions reporting and that type of thing. So what's the next step? What do you do? Like, first off, you need to think about, is this suitable for your business? As I've mentioned, it's a bit of a commitment. You know, the long term, the fixed price, the bit of work that's involved. That and just to clarify why we're presenting this is we can help from end to end in terms of corporate PPAs. We can help the whole way through that journey. So there is a bit of work involved, but we'll be with you, kind of partnering with you on that the entire way, and I'll explain how in a minute. But so you need to think about, after this webinar, right, what are my motivators? Why would I want a corporate PPA? If you're part of a multinational organization, what can be useful is, well, have we done similar in other jurisdictions? Do we have public pledges, net zero targets, scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions to address? Has this been assigned to you or someone in your organization as being a necessary instrument to achieve those targets? Are you signed up to any of the carbon reporting bodies like the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Business in the Community Ireland, Science Based Targets, or RE100, maybe one of the others? There's many of them out there. The greenhouse gas protocol is just a method of accounting carbon, and then those initiatives tend to sit on top of that, and they say, well, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to account for our carbon using this protocol, and we're going to do all these other things as well, and this is how we're going to achieve net zero. So that's kind of the difference between them if you don't know them already. And do we need long-term budget certainty on energy costs? I just saw a question come in there which I'll answer real quick because it flashed up on my screen. What's the price per kilowatt hour of energy of renewable energy in 2022? The RES 2 auction is our best indication of that yet, and the results of that was 9.8 cent per kilowatt hour on the energy. Now, every project is going to have its own energy price that it needs to land at in order to make its business case. Some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower, but that's a great indication of where things are at in Ireland today. Is 9.8 cent per kilowatt hour, roughly, was the cleared price in RES 2 averaged across kind of the entire pot. And because it's an average, some people are cheaper and some people are more expensive. So in terms of next steps for you after this webinar, take away the learnings, see how they apply to your business. The first thing to think about is consider price and term. Can you do 10 years? Can you do a fixed price? If you can you do 9.8 cent? If you can't, what can you do? Can you do 10 cent? Can you do 11 cent? Can you do 9.5 cent? Can you do 9 cent? What's going to work and what's going to be attractive to a developer? And as I said, there's no fixed price. It's not, you're not going to call Barry up and say, I'd love a corporate PPA at 10 cent. Barry's not going to say, great, we'll do that for you. He's going to say, right, let's see if we can find someone who'll do it for you at 10 cent. Because Flogas don't develop renewable projects, but we do have those relationships in the market, and we have a good visibility on the pipeline, and we've been around a long time in that industry. So we'd start making calls and see, is 10 cent a good figure for you, for somebody, you know, and we'd find that match. So price and term was the second point. The next thing for you to think about is start engaging the relevant stakeholders, or maybe you need to give it a bit more thought first, which we can help you with as well. But in any case, at some point, you need to engage the relevant stakeholders in your organization, because it's going to be a team effort across sustainability, procurement, finance. You're going to need senior backing realistically to enter a long-term agreement like this, because it's not your usual electricity procurement process anymore. It's now that growing into something a little bit bigger, but you get more out of it as well. And the last piece then, Flogas Enterprise, we're on, I was calling it a marketing campaign, but I've changed my mind. It's an educational campaign, and we're trying to educate the market of energy users around corporate PPAs. We firmly believe this is the way forward of energy procurement, and we're going to see more of these deals coming. We've seen it happen in the US and the European markets as well, and it's only a matter of time. It's happening in the UK. It's only a matter of time before we see more of them here, and we've seen those pilot projects kind of with the experienced buyers happening in Ireland already. So we're excited to try bring that to our customers and get them involved too. So that's the next step. So with that slide, that's one to come back to and just kind of ponder after this webinar when the time is right, or with the relevant people in your organization. And that's your fourth learning objective of hopefully being empowered at least to start thinking about a corporate PPA and what's involved. And Siobhan, then just if you can move on. So as I said, I snuck in a little sneaky marketing piece, and I called it a learning objective. It's just to demonstrate or tell you what we can do to help you along this process. So if you move on to the next slide, Siobhan, please. Look, we've we've been doing PPAs in Ireland for over 10 years, and now we have the experience with the contracts. We understand all the key risks and terms, and we have the relationships in that market. So we want to bring that to our customers. We've developed a corporate PPA training program, which is free to customers. So the short training program is to engage yourselves. It's to engage your stakeholders and to bring to get you up to speed on the contracts, on the key risks, the commercial terms, the other terms, and bring you to the point that we've called CPPA ready, which is to say this corporate has done a bit of work. They've engaged with Flogas, and now they're ready to really go to the market and talk to developers about corporate PPAs. So because if you're to approach a developer today, they might send you a term sheet and say, what do you think of this? But where do you start? How do you dissect this term sheet? What do all of these things mean? I've never seen this before. So that's what we can bring to you, is to help you understand all that. And we want to put the bit of work in, the bit of homework in, and get you ready to approach the market and bring your own terms to the market. That's what we want to do. We can do the matchmaking with suitable renewable projects. As I said, there's a big pipeline of projects, some in the res auctions, some not. And I'm aware I've gone over, so I'll wrap it up. A bit of guidance as to expectations around price, terms, some of the other key things like balancing and that type of thing. We can support on the contractual negotiations of your corporate PPA, and the reason we might do that is because we can give effect to the corporate PPA with back-to-back contracts. We supply on one side and we buy on the other side, and essentially it just flows through us as a supplier. So we're just trying to facilitate your arrangement with the developer ultimately, and then that bit of the personal account management from the renewables, which is myself and my team, and the sales team, which is Barry and his account managers, throughout the entire process from today on. Hope maybe the first time you're hearing of it, with the webinar, and then subsequent training programs, the introduction piece, the contract negotiations, go live with the new project, and then the maybe 10-15 year term where we're working with you on it to make sure everything is operating as expected. And there's one more, if you could move forward, please, Siobhan, a bonus learning objective. Barry alluded to it at the start. You're lucky because everything you've learned today also applies to biomethane. It's only when you get into the nitty gritty kind of granular detail that there start to be little variations, but at a high level, in relation to biomethane, there's a big pipeline of projects, similar contract structure between the supplier, the buyer, and the seller, the green benefits that come with it, the energy hedge, budget security, and that long-term commitment as well. So you've actually learned, you've done two courses, one in renewable electricity corporate PPAs and one in biomethane purchase agreements as well. So I've gone 3 minutes over there, so sorry about that. But if there are any questions, happy to
All right.
have a chat.
Thanks, James. Many thanks for that. That was great. There's a lot of information there for people to take in. So, well, Siobhan, if you open up people's mics, maybe I'll kick off with a question. So, James, in terms of, is it expected that there will be further government incentives and supports for power and biomethane in terms of to get things moving and to ensure that corporates buy into this and everything is there in place to actually set up the sector properly?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Kind of as I said in one of the slides there, in the policy environment, there's been kind of consultation with industry as to kind of what policy is needed to help support all areas of the industry around markets, around sellers, but also around buyers and bringing corporates to the table. So a bit more progress on the electricity side than the biomethane, being honest. But yeah, the government is committed to doing something here, although we're just yet to see it, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions from participants there? Anybody want to put in a question to James?
I think most people are still muted, so
No, everybody's off. So, James, probably just one more question. So, putting yourself in the customer's shoes. So, what's the first thing you would do in terms of if a company has targets in terms of 2050 net zero targets? What's the first thing you would actually do? I know you had a slide there in terms of some thoughts and process, but what would be the first thing you would do, putting yourself in the customer's shoes?
Well, putting yourself in a customer's shoes. I mean, the first step, you have to take a step back again. If you're targeting net zero by 2050, you need to eliminate all your carbon emissions, right? Or maybe all your greenhouse gas emissions, not just carbon. So I guess the first place is to assess your emissions and to begin accounting for them and being able to quantify them. So you have to quantify them before you can do anything about them. So your first step really is to start on that process of greenhouse gas emissions reporting with the greenhouse gas protocol. That's your first step, because then you have then you know the numbers. You're like, right, we have this amount of carbon, this amount of methane, whatever the other emissions are. Then the way they structure that is and maybe everyone here knows already, but just to say it, scope 1 emissions is emissions related to your processes. Scope 2 emissions is related to your energy consumption. Scope 3 emissions is your upstream, downstream, your supply chain, your customers, and their emissions. A corporate PPA addresses your scope 2 emissions. And then, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't address your scope 1 or scope 3. Maybe it falls into your scope 3 if you bundle in your supply chain or you engage them around doing a corporate PPA as well, which is or again on the biomethane piece to address the gas emissions too. But yeah, everything we've kind of discussed today is around scope 2 emissions and addressing that. And but yeah, if you're targeting 2050 net zero, it starts with accounting for the emissions first off, because if you can't quantify it, how can you address it? That'd be
Okay,
my
perfect. Perfect. Okay, we'll open questions to the floor then. Any questions for James? Okay. Okay, so I take it mics are open, Siobhan. So there's probably no questions, but listen, the webinar has been recorded. It'll be available to you, and we'll make the slides available as well. So I hope you found our webinar insightful. There's a lot of information there. If you have any questions, you wish to discuss any aspects, you can go back to your account manager, or indeed you can come back to myself or James, and we'd be happy to discuss with you. So I suppose that's probably a good opening platform, James, in terms of maybe starting some conversations with quite a number of customers. So we're here, we're ready to help. So we'll probably leave it at that. And listen, come back to us if you wish to discuss further. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your time.
Hopefully you found that useful.